It was a game, and you were just a pawn. Dave stood frozen as Lucy's words echoed in his mind. Prescott isn't your son? His entire world shattered in a single moment. His wife hadn't just betrayed him. She had deceived him for years. And now, this man, John, had arrived to deliver the final blow. But if she thought he would walk away, she was dead wrong. His revenge would be cold and merciless. He would take everything she loved. This game was far from over. Dave was an ordinary middle-aged man. He worked for a small company specializing in interior design, and although he couldn't boast of great achievements, his life was calm and stable. Lucy, his wife, was a preschool teacher, and although their marriage was far from perfect, she had always been there. Or so Dave thought. They had a 7-year-old son, Scott. Dave sincerely loved his family, and although there were occasional hints that something was off between him and Lucy, he chose to ignore them. He had noticed more than once how Lucy would leave her phone on the table or how her gaze had become distant, but these were minor suspicions at best. One evening, returning home late from work, Dave decided to rest on the couch for a few minutes before going to see his son. Lucy was on her phone again, her face focused, and when she noticed Dave watching her, she quickly set the device aside. This caused a slight unease in Dave, but he chose not to make a big deal out of it. "What are you looking at?" he asked, trying not to sound suspicious. "Nothing special," Lucy replied without meeting his gaze. "Just checking messages from friends." Her words seemed quite ordinary. Lucy had always been active on social media, and Dave had never paid much attention to it. However, soon he began to notice even more strange moments. Lucy was often preoccupied when he came home, and over time, her time with their son began to dwindle. She also started going out with friends more frequently, something she hadn't done much before. One day, when Dave came home from work a little earlier, he saw Lucy on the phone having a conversation that seemed strange to him. She stood on the balcony, her voice calm, but with a hint of nervousness. "I know what you want, but if he finds out, everything will be ruined," she said, and Dave clearly heard the name of a man he didn't recognize. At that moment, he couldn't fully grasp what was happening. A few days later, he received his first real clue that things might not be as he had thought. He found an unusual message on Lucy's phone from the same man she had mentioned. He didn't need to read much to understand that this was not just a friendly conversation. The messages hinted at meetings, emotional expressions, and a few coded phrases that Dave couldn't ignore. "Who is this?" he asked when Lucy returned home and saw him holding her phone. "It means nothing," she replied quickly, though her face betrayed nervousness. "Just a colleague." But Dave felt it wasn't true. Something about this situation was deeply unsettling. He decided to carefully watch her behavior, and over time, his suspicions were confirmed. Lucy became even more distant, and when he tried to bring up the topic, she avoided the conversation. One day after work, Dave went to see one of his friends, John, whom he trusted. He decided to share his doubts and concerns. "I think Lucy is cheating on me," Dave said grimly, looking at John. "Are you sure?" John asked, raising an eyebrow. "I can't prove it, but all these signs, they can't be random. From time to time, I hear strange phrases, find suspicious messages on her phone, and then she starts acting like a stranger," Dave replied. John thought for a moment and then shared some interesting information. "You know, I've heard that Lucy sometimes goes out with some guy. They spend a lot of time together, but I'm not sure who he is," John said, looking at his friend with concern. Those words were the final push for Dave. He decided to find out who this man was. And so, one evening, when Lucy once again left him at home with Scott, Dave followed her. He kept his distance, watching her actions. Finally, he saw her meet the very man whose name he had already learned from her phone conversations. It was Greg, her former partner, with whom she had a brief romance before meeting Dave. Dave watched them for a few minutes, then decided to get closer. They didn't notice him as he approached. In their conversation, he heard a phrase that shattered him completely. "We can't keep meeting like this, but we also can't forget about each other," Lucy said, looking at Greg with an intimate gaze. Those words pierced Dave's heart, and he walked away without making a sound. That night, he couldn't sleep, realizing that his family had been broken. He understood that all these years, his trust had been a lie, and now he had only one question left. what to do next. The next day, when Lucy came home, Dave was ready to talk. "I know what's going on, Lucy," he began calmly, looking her in the eyes. "And I don't want to live a lie anymore." Lucy froze, her face turned pale, and her eyes seemed to drop to the floor. She remained silent, her lips trembling, but she didn't appear to be trying to explain herself. Gathering all his strength, Dave continued, "You can't hide it anymore. I saw you with him, with Greg, and you're not even trying to explain? Why, Lucy?" Now she lifted her eyes, but there were no tears in them, only a cold, detached gaze, as if she had been expecting this moment. "You know everything, don't you?" she finally said, her voice not as confident as usual. "I meant for this to happen. I couldn't live in a lie anymore." Dave felt a heavy weight drop onto his chest. It turned out that this was much worse than he could have imagined. She had been cheating on him for over a year, and he had never suspected it. She had been seeing Greg, her ex, and their relationship was likely much deeper than just a casual encounter. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you keep it to yourself?" he asked, his voice tinged with disappointment. Lucy swallowed, her expression growing even colder. "Because you haven't changed, Dave. You're still the same. You just work, stay silent, and think that all problems can simply be ignored. I got bored. It became hard to be with you, and I needed more. Greg gave me what I was missing." She paused before adding, "He showed me a different life, Dave." These words completely threw him off balance. He couldn't believe this had all been happening right in front of him, that Lucy hadn't just betrayed him physically, but emotionally as well. She no longer wanted to be with him. More than that, Greg had become more than just someone. He was the one who had filled her emptiness. "I can't believe this," he whispered, taking a step back. "And now what? What do you want from me?" Lucy remained silent, but her expression became even more distant and impenetrable. She looked at him for a few seconds before speaking, her voice devoid of emotion. "I want a divorce, Dave. I don't want to be your wife anymore." Those words hurt him more than he could have imagined. Divorce? He had never considered that this would be her decision. To him, it felt like a knife to the heart. All these years, their son, their family life. It was all falling apart now. "You've already decided everything without me, haven't you?" he asked, struggling to contain his emotions. "And what about Prescott? Are you planning to take him with you?" Lucy glanced at him with a slight smirk before replying, "Prescott can't choose between us. He's already suffering. I want us both to be happy, not just holding on for his sake. But I think he should be with me. Greg and I have already discussed it." Those words stunned Dave. She hadn't even given him a chance. She hadn't even tried to explain why things had turned out this way. Dave stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. "You're with him?" he blurted out again. "You and Greg want to take my son away from me? How could you?" Lucy remained calm, though something in her eyes hinted at an internal struggle. "Yes, I think it's what's best for him," she said coldly. "And you? You're just going to keep living in your own world, ignoring everything happening right in front of you?" Dave stood still, his face deathly pale. He couldn't believe it. Lucy, his wife, the woman he had raised their son with, was now speaking so easily about divorce and taking their child away. 1,000 questions raced through Dave's mind. How had this happened? Why hadn't he noticed it earlier? How could he have been so blind? And just at that moment, when he decided he couldn't let this happen, the doorbell rang. Lucy went to answer it, and Dave knew exactly who it might be. Silently, he moved toward the doorway and, hiding just out of sight, watched as Lucy opened the door. His heart pounded when he saw Greg. "It's you?" Dave said, addressing Greg as he stepped inside. Greg looked at him but didn't answer immediately. He simply smiled and shrugged. "We're all adults here, Dave," he said. "Lucy made her decision, and you can't change what's already happened." Those words made something snap inside Dave. Another blow. But he wasn't going to back down. "I won't let you take my son away from me," he said, his voice laced with cold determination. Greg smirked and, glancing at Lucy, asked, "And what do you plan to do about it?" Dave stood at the threshold, feeling his heart race with frustration and anger. Greg and Lucy stood together, their eyes locked in an unspoken understanding, two shared secrets now out in the open. Dave took a deep breath and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You probably think this is all settled, don't you? Dave said, his gaze fixed on Greg. That I should just walk away and leave you in Prescott? Lucy remained silent. She stood there, completely calm, though there was an inexplicable weariness in her eyes. She had already made her decision, and that fact weighed heavily on Dave because he didn't even know when it had all started. When had she stopped being his wife in her heart? When had they stopped being a team? It had all happened so gradually that he hadn't even noticed. Greg took a deep breath and looked at Lucy. Dave, I understand this is hard, but you both need to accept reality, he said calmly, even with a hint of sympathy in his voice. Lucy has made her choice, and now it's time to move forward. Dave looked at his wife again. She was different. Her expression had turned cold, distant. It was as if her soul had already left this home long ago, and her body remained only out of necessity. He couldn't understand why this had happened, but with every word she spoke, he felt himself drifting further away from her. You want me to just accept that you're giving your love to another man while I have to leave and give up my son? Dave couldn't contain his voice. It was nearly a shout. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Why did you hide all of this? Lucy sighed and, gathering all her strength, replied, I don't know why I stayed silent. Maybe I was afraid of the pain. Maybe I just didn't know how to do it. But I can't live in a lie anymore, Dave. I can't be with you when I have feelings for someone else. Greg makes me happy. And that doesn't mean I don't value what we had, but I can't keep living in the past. Dave stood like a stone, unsure of what to do next. His soul was torn to pieces, but his anger was turning into a cold fury. He had been with her for so many years. They had been through so much together, joy and sorrow, dreams and reality. And now, as everything was falling apart, Lucy just stood there, and her words left deep wounds, like the final blow of a hammer. You can't just take my son away from me, Lucy, Dave said, trying to keep his emotions in check. I won't let you. I will fight for Prescott, no matter what you decide. Lucy seemed prepared for this, and her expression remained unchanged. She simply looked at him and quietly said, This isn't just my decision, Dave. Prescott will be with me. Greg stood silently, observing them but not interfering. He was a part of this tragedy, yet he seemed unwilling to take sides. You don't understand, Lucy, Dave responded, exhaling deeply. You don't understand what I'm willing to do to keep Prescott. You took my wife away, and now you want to take my son. You're not even giving me a chance to fight for him. Lucy closed her eyes, her face tightening with emotion, but she said nothing. Only after a long pause, barely audibly, she added, I want you to understand, Dave. I don't want this life anymore. I don't want you anymore. I don't want to be the kind of person who stays in a relationship just because of the kids. The words hit him like a cold shower. Dave felt the ground slipping from under his feet. She was ready not just for a divorce but for losing her son, if it meant she could start a new life. He looked at her face, and couldn't believe that this woman, whom he had loved, was letting go of everything they had so easily. You can't just decide for both of us. Dave turned to Greg. You have no right to interfere in my life like this. Greg replied calmly, I'm not interfering. I'm just supporting her decision. Those words made Dave's anger flare even more. His entire life was crumbling before him, and he didn't know what to do next. He just stood there, on the doorstep, watching as his family shattered before his eyes. Dave felt the weight of the day's events pressing down on his shoulders. He struggled to keep his emotions in check, but everything that was happening felt like storm clouds, ready to tear apart his inner peace. Lucy, standing before him, was no longer the woman he had once loved. There was no warmth in her eyes anymore. Now, they were filled with determination. I don't want you to feel betrayed, Dave, Lucy began, trying to keep her voice steady. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. I just can't be with you anymore. Everything between us has changed. Dave couldn't say anything. His heart pounded wildly, and he felt memories and rage intertwining in his mind. He could no longer stand before this woman, his wife, and feel that she was the one now dictating the rules. You still won't understand, Lucy continued. This isn't just betrayal. This is a decision I made a long time ago, and I can't come back to you. Greg stood to the side, watching them with distant indifference. He didn't interfere, but his presence was an uncomfortable reminder of why all of this had come to an end. Dave wiped his face with his hand, trying to gather his thoughts. And Prescott? His voice was firm, but inside, a wave of anxiety was rising. You can't just take him, Lucy. I won't allow it. He needs to be with me. Lucy sighed and slowly looked at him. Her eyes seemed to hide nothing, but something in her gaze had changed. This was no longer a fight for justice. It was a fight for freedom. I won't stop you from being a father to Prescott, Lucy said, her voice still cold but filled with a certain determination. But I think he'll be better off with me. I have the right to choose how I want to live. Dave couldn't believe his ears. This was too much. She had literally chosen her freedom, prioritizing her personal happiness over everything else. She had made her decision, and now she was trying to convince him it was the right one. You can't just take him, Lucy, Dave shouted, his rage flaring. I will fight for him. I will fight for our future. I know you want to fight, Dave, Lucy said without meeting his eyes. But it won't change anything. My decision is final. Dave felt his heart clench. All his efforts to hold his family together, to fight for Prescott, it all seemed pointless now. And in that moment, he realized that there was nothing left for him to change. Lucy was ready to move on, while he stood there, not knowing how to. I want you to know that I'm not doing this to hurt you, Lucy continued. I just can't live like this anymore. Dave fell silent. His mind was filled with pain, but he was no longer the same man he had been before. He could no longer just stand there, waiting and watching this tragedy unfold. He needed to act. I'm taking Prescott, he finally said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. Lucy looked at him again, but this time, her gaze was softer, tinged with regret. You want to take a child away from his mother? She asked, her voice shifting to one of quiet sympathy. Do you think that's the right thing to do? Dave stood there in silence. He realized that every decision he made now would be questioned. Every step he took would put his bond with Prescott at risk, and he had no idea how to fix it. I don't want to do this, Dave admitted, but I can't be with you anymore. And I can't leave my son in this situation. I have the right to be a part of his life. Lucy hadn't expected this response. She fell silent again, and the weight of that silence was heavier than words. Greg remained on the sidelines, watching them, but he wasn't a part of this painful conversation. You don't understand that Prescott needs both of us, Lucy said after a pause, her voice quieter now. But I understand that fighting for him is your decision. Dave glanced at his son, sitting in the next room. He felt shattered, but he was also resolute. The battle for his family wasn't over yet, and he was ready to fight until the end. Dave returned to the bedroom, the space where he and Lucy had once planned their future together. Now, everything felt different. His heart pounded, each beat echoing the betrayal that had pierced his soul. He didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. He would not let his son go. The word fatherhood meant everything to him, and he couldn't leave Scott in these circumstances. He stepped onto the balcony and looked out at the night city. Everything was quiet, but inside, his turmoil roared. His thoughts swung between rage and despair. Just as his mind struggled to push through his emotions, he heard footsteps behind him. Dave! It was Lucy. Her voice was soft, laced with regret. Don't you want to listen to me? Dave turned and looked at her. She stood in the doorway with the same familiar expression, yet everything about her seemed different now. This was the look of a person who was broken, even if she was trying to hide it. I've heard enough, Lucy, Dave replied coldly. You made your decision, but I can't just forget what you've done. I won't let Prescott be a part of this lie. Lucy walked toward him slowly, her movements careful, as if she was trying not to disturb his fragile emotions. It was harder than you think, Dave, she said, her voice losing some of its harshness. I never wanted to hurt you, but when you started pulling away, when we stopped being a team, I didn't know what to do. I was scared of being alone. Dave couldn't understand why she had chosen this path. He had been ready to come back, to give her a chance if she had just been honest with him, if she hadn't betrayed him. But her decision felt final. How had it come to this? You cheated on me, Lucy. And that's not something a simple apology can fix, he said through gritted teeth. You were with another man. You just ran away from us. I can't rebuild trust that easily. My family isn't a game. Lucy lowered her head as if trying to process his words. Her expression was sorrowful, and her inner conflict was evident. I never wanted to lose you, she whispered. But at some point, I stopped feeling like I was part of this family. I was just trying to find myself. Her words cut through Dave like a knife, but he forced himself to stay calm. There was no need to find yourself in someone else's arms, Lucy, Dave said. If you truly loved our family, you wouldn't have betrayed me. Lucy took a step back, lowering her head. She remained silent, and that silence was the heaviest moment of all. But just then, a new figure appeared at the doorway, someone Dave never expected to see here. It was Tom, Dave's friend, who turned out not to be much of a friend after all. Dave, I need to talk to you, Tom said. His face was calm, but there was a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Dave didn't understand what was happening, but it was no coincidence. What are you doing here? Dave asked darkly, sensing that something was off. Tom frowned. I needed to talk to Lucy, he said, casting a quick glance at her. I know why you feel this way, Dave. I never wanted this, but... He hesitated. A heavy pause filled the air. What was he trying to say? And why did it seem like he was hiding something? What do you mean? Dave asked, suspicion filling his voice. Tom looked at Lucy, then slowly turned his gaze back to Dave. I didn't want to tell you this, but I can't keep it a secret anymore, Tom said, his voice serious and weighted. Lucy and I, we were together. It's not what you think, but it's the truth. His words hit Dave like a thunderbolt. His heart stopped for a moment, and his mind struggled to process what he had just heard. What? Dave felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. You were cheating on me with Lucy? Tom shook his head grimly. I never wanted you to find out like this, but I couldn't keep lying. I'm sorry, brother, but it happened. Dave stood in complete shock, watching as his friend and his wife revealed one of the greatest betrayals of his life. How could you, Tom? How could you? Dave shouted, feeling his world shatter. Lucy stood off to the side, her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. The silence between them was deeper than ever before. Dave stood motionless, unable to believe what he had just heard. His heart pounded, the pain tearing him apart from the inside, but he tried to stay composed. How had this happened? Tom, his friend, someone he had trusted, and Lucy, his wife, the person who was supposed to be his support, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. How could you, Tom? Dave said, trying to steady himself. His voice was low, but the anger within him was hard to contain. You were my friend, and now you do this to me? You knew how much I loved her. Tom was too calm to seem genuine. He looked like someone who didn't fully grasp the depth of the pain he had caused. Dave, I had no other choice, Tom replied, his face heavy with emotion. I know this hurts. I don't want you to suffer, but you deserve to know the truth. Lucy stood aside, her face pale, her eyes full of tears, but she still couldn't say a word. This was a moment where words meant nothing. The truth? Dave shouted. You think I don't already know the truth? I saw what was happening. I saw how you betrayed me, Lucy. But this is even worse than I could have imagined. After a few moments of silence, Lucy lifted her gaze. She stepped toward Dave, reaching for his hand, but he pulled away. Her eyes were filled with regret. Dave, please, believe me, she said softly, but her voice carried undeniable emotion. I didn't do this because I didn't love you. I did it because we had grown apart. I felt alone, and Tom was just someone who understood me. I don't want this to destroy us, but I don't know how to fix it. Dave stood still, trying to figure out what to do next. His soul felt torn apart. How could he ever forgive this? How could he forgive the person who was supposed to be his partner and wife, yet also became his biggest betrayer? This isn't something you can just ask me to forgive, Lucy, Dave said, his voice trembling with bitter pain. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed our family. Prescott is going to suffer because of this, too, and I won't let you keep him in this mess. Tom stepped closer, but Dave shoved him away. You have no right to say anything to me, Tom, Dave said, looking him in the eyes. You are no longer my friend. You're nothing to me. And I won't stay silent when it comes to my son. Tom sighed nervously and started pacing around the room, as if searching for the right words to justify himself. I know this sounds like betrayal, Dave, but I couldn't just stand by and watch how you treated her, Tom said. I saw how she suffered, how you distanced yourself from her. I was just there when she needed someone. And that's not an excuse, I understand, but it's the truth. Dave was stunned. He stood there, not knowing what to do next. His friends, his family, everything he loved. It was all crumbling before his eyes. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Tom, Dave said, his voice hoarse with anger. And I definitely don't know how I could ever forgive you, Lucy. Meanwhile, Lucy sat at the edge of the bed, her eyes filled with tears. She could no longer hold back her emotions. Dave, you don't understand how much this hurts me, she said, her voice barely audible. I know I made a mistake. I broke you, but I didn't know what to do. I was at my breaking point, and Tom was the only support I had. I don't want this to end like this. Dave felt like he was on the edge. He couldn't understand how this had all happened. He loved her. He loved their son. But now everything seemed hopeless. How am I supposed to trust you again, Lucy? How? He asked, his voice trembling with despair. And how am I supposed to look Prescott in the eye, knowing that his mother betrayed us? You destroyed everything that mattered to us. Those words cut deep into Lucy. She wanted to explain, but she knew nothing would change now. Every excuse sounded empty. I understand, she answered quietly. But I still love you, Dave, and I want to be with you. I just don't know how to fix this. But everything had already been said. Dave walked toward the door and looked at her one last time. This can't be fixed, Lucy. And you've already lost everything I had for you. Everything we built. You stay with Tom, and I'll stay with my son. With those words, he walked out, not looking back, feeling his heart shatter into pieces. But he knew he could no longer be with Lucy. Now, the only thing left for him to do was take care of his son and gather the evidence he needed to take him away from her. Dave couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He sat in the dark corner of his room, his head resting in his hands. Lucy and Tom's words echoed in his mind, but nothing could heal the wound now lodged deep in his heart. He tried to find some explanation for her actions, but deep down, he knew this was more than just a mistake. What do I do now? He whispered to himself, staring at a photo of him, Lucy, and Prescott. It was from a time when they were happy, before everything fell apart. Now, it all seemed so distant, as if it had happened in another lifetime. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, and he saw a message from an old friend. It was Jonathan. They hadn't spoken in months, but Dave decided to answer. Hey, John. What's up? I saw how you looked, Jonathan replied. Do you want to talk? It's about Lucy. Dave couldn't believe his eyes. How did Jonathan know about this? He replied. What do you mean? How do you know? After a brief pause, Jonathan wrote back. I know more than you think. And it's not what you believe. Dave, your wife is hiding something. Those words made his heart clench. What else was Lucy hiding? What else could be even worse? Dave grabbed his phone and dialed Jonathan's number. John, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I can't explain everything over text. Come see me today, and I'll tell you everything, Jonathan replied. Dave couldn't wait. He needed to know more. Could Lucy have done something else that he didn't know about? He immediately drove to Jonathan's place. When Dave entered his friend's apartment, Jonathan looked serious. He wasn't the same easygoing guy Dave remembered. There was worry in his eyes. What did you find out? Dave asked, feeling his nerves tighten. You need to be ready for what I'm about to tell you, Jonathan said, looking at him gravely. I know you found out about Lucy and Tom, but you don't know everything. Dave sat down on the couch, his heart pounding harder. He felt a wave of fear beginning to take hold of him. Tell me what you know, Dave demanded. Lucy didn't just cheat on you with Tom, Jonathan began. She was involved with someone else. I found out when I overheard a conversation at a restaurant. She was seeing another man, and I'm not sure who he is, but I know for certain that this situation is much more complicated than it seems. Dave sat there, numb with shock. What else? What other dark secret had Lucy been keeping? He couldn't believe that his life, the life he thought he had control over, was crumbling like sand through his fingers. This isn't everything, Jonathan continued. I found out that Lucy tried to withdraw money from your account. She was acting like she was preparing to leave you and take Prescott, but she couldn't go through with it. Dave felt his hands start to tremble. Money? What kind of plan was this? Was she really planning to leave him and take their son? I can't believe this. Are you telling me she planned all of this? Dave asked, trying to make sense of what was happening. Exactly, Jonathan replied. She's been manipulating you this whole time, and Tom was probably just a part of it. She thought you wouldn't notice, but you did, and that's why she started panicking. She's afraid you'll find out more. Dave felt like the world around him was shifting. This was no longer just about betrayal. This was something much bigger. His wife hadn't just cheated. She had been plotting to ruin his life and take his son away. He needed to act fast. I can't stay with her anymore, John. I can't let this continue, Dave said, standing up. I'm taking Prescott and getting out of here. I won't leave him with her. Jonathan looked at him with a heavy expression. Are you sure? This won't be easy, Dave. You need to be prepared for anything. Dave clenched his fists. He had no choice. If I don't stop this now, I'll lose everything. My son. Everything I have. I won't let her take him from me. Leaving Jonathan's apartment, Dave felt his heart fill with rage and pain. He was going home, but this time, everything was different. He was going to do whatever it took to take Prescott from Lucy, even if it meant fighting to the very end. Determined, Dave drove home. He thought he had figured everything out, but something still gnawed at him. What else was Lucy hiding? What was behind her actions? Why had she been so determined to deceive and manipulate him? This time, he wouldn't let her escape the truth. When he entered the apartment, Lucy was in another room, seemingly unaware that he was home early. Dave paused at the doorway, watching her figure through the open door. Her back was turned to him, and for some reason, she looked too calm, as if nothing had happened. His heart tightened with anger. Lucy, his voice was low but firm. She turned and saw him standing there, his expression making her immediately tense up. Her lips pressed together, and her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. Her reaction only confirmed all of his suspicions. Dave, you're home earlier than I expected, she said, unable to hide the nervousness in her voice. Dave stepped forward, and she instantly felt her pulse quicken. Now, he was standing dangerously close. Do you really think I don't know what's going on? His words were filled with fury. Do you think I haven't noticed how you've been deceiving me? Lucy tried to mask her emotions, but there was something in her eyes that Dave caught immediately, fear. She slowly took a step back. Dave, please, she sighed, as if trying to find the right words. I don't know what you're talking about. You really want to play this game? He wasn't giving her any chances. You and Tom, and who else? I know everything I need to know. You were planning to take our son and leave me. You set all of this in motion before I even realized what was happening. But now, I'm ready to fight back. Her face went pale. She tried to smile, but it was forced and insincere. I don't know how it got to this, she began. But Dave wasn't listening. You can't just walk away from me, Lucy. You think you can control everything, that I wouldn't figure out the truth? You were wrong. His voice grew louder. Lucy nervously placed her hands on the table, avoiding his gaze. Dave, it's not that simple. I couldn't just tell you. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to say it. Her voice barely trembled. You couldn't, he laughed bitterly. You couldn't tell me the truth because you were afraid of the consequences, because you knew I wouldn't forgive you. You made this choice, Lucy, and now I'm making mine. Dave, please, don't do this. She tried to step closer, but he moved back. You have no right to ask me for anything. He closed his eyes, trying to control the storm inside him. I'm taking Prescott. I won't let you steal him from me, Lucy, and that's not your decision to make. Lucy stepped back, her voice softer and filled with sorrow. I can't stop you, but you don't understand, Dave, that I did this because of you. It was my mistake, and I don't know how to fix it. She stepped closer to him, but this time, Her gaze was vulnerable. I knew we would never be happy the way we were before. Because I wasn't honest with you. I betrayed you. But not because I wanted you to find out. Because I thought we could find a new path. I believed that maybe if I left, I would find true happiness. Dave looked at her, but there was no room for sympathy in his heart. She looked so fragile, but he couldn't afford to lose control. You made your choice, and now I'll make mine. You're taking Prescott? She whispered, her voice nearly breaking from pain. You won't leave him with me? You don't deserve him, Lucy. You did everything to destroy my trust. You won't get another chance with our family. But he's my son. I love him. Lucy suddenly broke down, her voice tense and bitter. You can't just take him from me. He needs me. Not as much as he needs me. Dave shot back, his eyes blazing with anger. I will fight for him, and if I have to, I will do whatever it takes to take him from you. They stood facing each other, both knowing that this conversation was only the beginning. Everything was different now. He would no longer let her manipulate him or their son. But Lucy wasn't ready to back down. You've made your choice, Dave. But I can still change things. You don't know everything. You don't even realize what's really happening. Dave fell silent. Something in her words made him hesitate, but he was determined. He wouldn't let her take Prescott. He wouldn't let her twist their lives any further. But what else was Lucy hiding? How far was she willing to go to get what she wanted? Dave stood in the room, swallowing every word Lucy spoke as the silence stretched between them. She looked completely different, not carefree as she always had been. Her hands were trembling, but she stood firm, her head slightly bowed, as if she was still trying to hide something. I won't give up, Dave said, locking eyes with Lucy. You can say whatever you want, but I'm taking Prescott. Lucy sighed and gave a faint smile. It wasn't a happy smile, more like the kind of exhaustion that settles after a long fight. You've always been like this. You think you have everything under control. But I've noticed one thing, Dave. You don't know the whole truth. His stomach clenched with unease. He recalled the times Lucy had said things like this before, when she wanted to throw him off balance, to manipulate him into doubt. But this time, something felt different, and he could feel it. What do you mean? His voice was sharp, but he held himself back. What else is there, Lucy? She took a step back, looking as though she was debating whether or not to say something. His sense of unease deepened. He clenched his fists, bracing himself for whatever was coming next. You don't know what I've learned about you, she continued, her voice now carrying a bitter edge. Did you really think I was just sitting around, watching? Dave didn't know how to respond. His stomach churned, and more questions filled his head. About me? He turned to her, narrowing his eyes. What did you find out, Lucy? You don't even know what you're saying. I know more than you think, she said firmly. It didn't take me long to realize that you've been looking for compromises with other women. Dave was stunned. How could she know? He had always been careful, making sure not to draw attention to anything that might make her suspicious. But somehow, things had shifted. You can't accuse me of that, he shouted. But his voice wasn't as confident as he wanted it to be. That's not true. Lucy nodded, as if agreeing with him, but her eyes still carried an unreadable mix of anger and pain. You think I don't know? That I didn't notice the scent of someone else's perfume still clinging to your shirt when you came home? She raised an eyebrow. You think I can't tell when you're hiding something from me? Dave had no response. She had noticed far more than he had expected. It was a cruel realization, but now, when he could no longer hide the truth from himself, this conversation only made everything more complicated. It doesn't matter. I'm taking Prescott anyway, he said, his voice almost maniacally stubborn. And you won't stop me. But before Lucy could respond, the door suddenly swung open. A middle-aged man stepped into the room, tall, with dark hair that was streaked with silver. His expression was tense, but his gaze was calm, as if he was already familiar with the situation. Can we talk, Dave? His voice was low, but firm enough to demand Dave's attention. Dave, not knowing who this man was, glanced at Lucy. She had just changed her expression to one of extreme caution. For a moment, her eyes clouded over, deepening Dave's distrust even further. Was this yet another part of her game? Who are you? Dave asked, trying to keep his composure. My name is John. I know what you're about to do, and I won't let you ruin it. John locked eyes with Dave, as if trying to read his thoughts. Lucy was stunned, her lips slightly parted, but she said nothing. She only watched as John stepped closer to Dave. Who the hell are you? Dave crossed his arms, refusing to show any surprise. I'm the one who knows where Prescott belongs and how to stop you from taking him, John said with a smile, his eyes carrying an unspoken threat. Lucy quickly turned to Dave. Dave, this isn't what you think. John is my... She hesitated, as if unsure how to explain who this man was. He's here to help us. Dave's confusion deepened. Help us? How could this man possibly help? He felt something was terribly wrong. Lucy, John, Prescott. Was this just another calculated move in her bigger game? Help you? He asked, looking from John to Lucy, trying to piece together the puzzle. It's not that simple, Dave, John responded, keeping his gaze steady. You'll understand in time. Those words were the final blow. Dave stood in the room, realizing he didn't truly know who these people were or what they were planning. And then, the realization hit him. Lucy had been playing a game, and John was part of it. But for what purpose? Dave stood there, processing John's words. Each one felt like another calculated piece in a grand chess match where the rules had suddenly changed. Who the hell are you? Dave asked, forcing his voice to stay calm despite the storm inside him. John nodded, as if he had been expecting the question. I'm the one with the answers you're looking for. But you're not ready to hear them, he said smoothly, his voice carrying an unshakable confidence laced with an unspoken threat. Lucy remained silent. Dave turned to her, his rage boiling beneath the surface. You're in on this with him? This was your plan all along? She hesitated, then glanced at John before looking back at Dave. Yes, but it's more than you think, Dave. He and we always planned this together. Prescott isn't your son, and you won't take him from me, because he's already chosen. Dave froze. What did she just say? Prescott wasn't his son? What do you mean? His voice was barely a whisper, and his hands started to tremble again. Lucy slowly stepped closer, her eyes cold and unwavering. Prescott isn't your son, Dave. You only thought he was, but in reality, he's mine and John's. And you've always just been a pawn in our game. Dave stepped back, his heart pounding violently in his chest. It was a brutal truth he had never wanted to hear. Do you think Bass can find forgiveness for Lucy, or will his revenge be final?